so much for taking part of your day to be with me. I want to send you off from the conference with two thoughts and a plea. And so I'll just get underway if we're working here again. Great, so here's the first thing, the first thought. So this is William Easterly. He's a professor at NYU. He's also kind of one of my heroes. His book, The White Man's Burden, or Why the West's Efforts to Aid the Rest Have Done So Much Ill and So Little Good, talks about the two tragedies of the poor. And in this discussion of the two tragedies, it's the first one. This is Gordon Brown, who in 2005, when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he gave an impassioned speech about the first tragedy. That first tragedy was about the extreme poverty afflicting billions and billions of people, with millions of children dying of easily preventable diseases. He's a planner. He had a plan. His plan was to double the amount of foreign aid that went to developing countries. It also included something akin to a Marshall Plan for the world's poor, akin to when the recovery for Europe after World War II occurred. He suggested that there would be an international financing facility through the World Bank, against which tens of billions of more dollars could be borrowed to reduce the tragedy of the poor. He offered hope for this to happen. How? How could he offer hope? Well, it's easy to do good. After all, medicine that would prevent half of all malaria deaths costs only 12 cents per dose. And preventing 5 million child deaths would cost only about $3 for each new mother. A bed net to prevent a child from getting malaria costs only $4. But the second tragedy that Easterly talks about is something that Gordon Brown was silent about. And that has to do with this number, 2.3. It's that $2.3 trillion of foreign aid has been spent over the last 5 decades. And still, we have not managed to get the 12-cent medicines to the children and preventing half of all malaria deaths. We have still not been able to get the bed nets to the children, and we have not been able to get the medicines to the mothers after $2.3 trillion spent. Yet take mark on July 16, 2005. In a single day, on this very day, the American and British economies delivered 9 million copies of the 6th volume of the Harry Potter book series to eager fans. The book retailers continually restocked the shelves as customers snatched up the book. Now, there was no Marshall Plan for Harry Potter, no international financing facility for young wizards. And so for Easterly, it seemed heartbreaking that the global society had evolved so highly efficiently a way to get entertainment to rich adults and children while it can't get 12 cents of medicine to dying poor children. And so he goes on to talk about this notion of planners versus searchers. The short answer on why dying poor children don't get 12-cent medicines and the rich, healthy children get Harry Potter is that 12-cent medicines are supplied by planners and Harry Potter is supplied by searchers. Now, I'm not suggesting that everything should be turned over to a market approach, but rather it's a suggestion that the mentality of searchers is a guide to a constructive approach. And for Easterly, it was foreign aid. For us, it's education. So let's talk a little bit about what it is about planners and searchers and what do they do. Planners, well, they announce good intentions, but they don't really motivate anybody to carry them out. Whereas searchers, they find things that work, and then they get some reward. Planners, they raise expectations, but they really take no responsibility for meeting them, whereas a searcher accepts responsibility for their actions. Planners, they determine what to supply. They seem to know what people need. Whereas searchers, well, they find out what's in demand. I just blocked my screen. And planners apply global blueprints to problems that plague society, whereas searchers try to adapt to local conditions. Planners, they believe that outsiders know enough to impose solutions. Expertise is king, whereas searchers believe only insiders have enough knowledge to find solutions. if you spend any time with me over the last couple of days, you can probably think about how the notion of thinking about a human-centered design or design thinking is more akin to a searching mentality and really caring about the ways in which the people around us feel and think and how we can design for that. One of the things that we face as educators that's quite difficult, however, is this idea of the curse of knowledge, as Robin Hogarth talks about. And as teachers and as school leaders, as we think about ways to reform the work that we do, we have to be aware of this curse of knowledge that we may hold. And it goes essentially like this, that better informed people find it extremely difficult to think about problems from the perspective of lesser informed people. And in sort of the harshest view on this, at least in terms of education, perhaps it might be to say is that teachers and leaders find it extremely difficult to think about the problems from the perspective of students and parents and other stakeholders. So how might we get around that? That's thought number one. Thought number two. You know, there's a joke that goes around in education reform circles that goes essentially as follows, that if a person from the 1700s were able to time travel to the present day and they landed in an operating room in a hospital, they would have no idea where they are. But if they were to have landed in a classroom in a school, they would know exactly where they are. And this has gotten me thinking a lot about why is it that we have sort of the same sorts of processes and policies and practices in schools when we have such opportunities to design in a better way? Why do we have to put up with such bad design? As Guy Kawasaki notes, great organizations and ideas are enchanting. Crap is not. And so how do we think about ways in which we can design better? After all, who pays the cost for the design of the way we have schools today, and why can't they be better? Richard Simmons talks about the cost of bad design. This is work out of the built environment in the UK, but he talks about how poor design imposes a cost. And the cost is on society. It's on those that are at the end of the poor design. A key reason why these costs are not taken into account, because they are not paid by the people who make the decisions, but by the wider community. And so this has been bothering me a bit. Why do we put the teachers, the parents, the students through the processes that they go through now when they could be designed so much better? And perhaps it's not because we haven't thought it through, it's just that we need to settle in our heads how to be better designers. A summer or two ago, I read a book called The General Theory of Love. It's by Lewis and Lyman. They are neuroscientists at the University of California at San Francisco. And this book, I highly recommend it to you. It's a wonderful treatise on the way in which the brain works. It's not necessarily about love so much, but about what the new science on the brain says about the way we behave emotionally. And it taught me a lot about the way we think and the way our own brains operate that may give us insight into thinking about how we can be better designers and design the schools we want. As it happens, as one of the stories goes in here, this story of like how your brain works begins back in 1848 in the United States when the railroads were being fashioned across much of the country. In this case, it's the story of one gentleman named Phineas Gage, who was in Cavendish, Vermont, and he was the leader and foreman of a crew building the track through the countryside. It was this day that they came upon a large rock, and Phineas Gage, being an industrious foreman, took it upon himself to blast the rock out of the way. They drilled a hole into the rock, they poured powder into the hole of the rock, and he took a tamping iron to put it in there. It's when he placed the tamping iron in there, as his doctor later said, he had an abrupt and intrusive visitor. The tamping iron went through his cheek and behind his eye and out the back of his head and landed some several feet away. The miracle of this whole affair is that Phineas Gage is said to have walked up the steps to his doctor's office to be examined shortly thereafter. In fact, here's a picture of him later posing with a very tamping iron that pierced his brain. So the thing about this with Gage is that Gage was a very industrious worker. He was well liked in the community, well liked his crew. He was very polite, known to be very industrious. And yet, after the accident, he of course didn't go back to work. He lived in the community, but he took on different airs. He was kind of aggressive. He started to curse where he never did before. He was rude, difficult to get along with. As most of the people that knew him well said about him, he was no longer Gage. What had happened is that the part of his brain that had been pierced, first of all, it's fascinating that he had not died right away. It's because it didn't go through his limbic brain and missed it, but took out parts of his other neocortex and his reptile brain went out through other parts. And so this started some thinking around how there must be different parts of our brain that operate for different parts of our behaviors. And that happens to be the case for much of what we know today about the brain. This is an example of what McLean talks about as the triune brain. This is the prevailing theory that you're probably familiar with, that there are three parts to your brain. Triune, three parts operating as one. And so you've got a reptile brain, that's the stem there, that kind of keeps the lights on. Then you've got a limbic system, which is the second oldest part of your brain, and then the outer part of that is the neocortex, which is the largest part, but the youngest part of our brains. So let's talk briefly about what each of these do. So your reptile brain, this is the part that is at the stem of your neck down in here. This is a Komodo dragon. The term reptile brain obviously has to do with the fact that reptiles pretty much have just that. And it's said to be so far from the head it doesn't even know there's a head. And so Komodo dragons and other reptiles don't show feeling for others. Baby Komodo dragons are just as soon to be lunch for their mother as they are to be loved by them. And so this is the part of the brain that just operates at the very base level. Your limbic brain, the second oldest part of your brain, which is wrapped around your lizard brain, specializes in one thing very well. It does a lot of things, but very well, and it's detecting and analyzing the internal state of other mammals. So if you have the reason why kittens cry will attract the mother cat to it. Cats, dogs, and other mammals have limbic systems in them. And then on top of this, you've got your neocortex. This is the youngest part of the brain, but the bigger part. And this is the part where we can credit the towering achievements of humans. So the mere fact that you can understand the language that I'm speaking right now, you can thank your neocortex, your decoding, whatnot. The fact that we're in a building like this that's standing up and we're safe inside it, we can thank the neocortex. It's the most advanced part of our brain, and yet still the youngest. Now, as it happens though, and where we're going with this in terms of sort of design, is that there's a bit of a war going on inside your head that has to be reconciled. It kind of goes as follows. You've got, you can think of your brain as sort of the limbic, or the lizard brain, your reptile brain, maybe as a couple of your elderly parents living in a house, and then the two siblings are the limbic system and the limbic brain and the neocortex. The parents are home, they keep the lights on, they pay the bills, they make sure everybody's safe, but they don't really pay attention to the kids. The kids are left to their own devices. The limbic brain sibling is smaller but older, and really operates from the heart, has a lot of feeling, feels a lot, understands at a gut level what ought to be done. But he's always in a fight with his other brother, the neocortex, the younger one, but bigger, constantly shouting him down, saying, "That's ridiculous. That feeling you're having is really silly. Here's what we should do. Here's an analytical approach we can use. It'll be much better." Now, the interesting thing to take away from this is that this notion of what you're able to do with your limbic brain is unlike anything else in the animal kingdom. Surely you know about how bats have the ability to echolocate. And what a fascinating and enviable trait that they have. Who among us wouldn't love to be able to fly through the air, send out sonar-type beeps, and eat bugs through the air? I mean, I'd love to be able to do that. Eels and their unique ability to electromap in the water to find prey, bounce off of that, go to it, find food. Unique in the animal kingdom. We don't have that. Be quite an enviable trait. However, what humans have is this notion of limbic resonance. And limbic resonance is the ability for you to sense the internal state of another. For instance, maybe you can think of a time where you stepped on imagine yourself stepping onto a public bus, and there might be a teenager on the bus who brushes up against you and kind of bumps you aside, and you get a little bit jacked up, and you're a little heightened, and you see another person who's witnessed this, a woman, and you make eye contact, and she raises her eyebrows, and you look back and go, what's going on? And you have an entire conversation in about 0.3 of a second. You know what was going on there. That's limbic resonance. Many of you have been to the aquarium. Haven't been to the aquarium. So this is a shark. Sharks don't operate with a limbic system, a limbic brain. And so when you look into the eyes of the shark, you look deeply into it, can you sense what it is they're thinking? Can you sense the internal state of their mind as you look into their eye? What about now? That was limbic resonance. So, what about now? I'm suggesting that we may have outsmarted ourselves in the poor design, that we let our neocortex talk us out of the kind of empathetic limbic approaches we need to really design for another. So here's my plea. My plea is actually to you. And my plea is to be cognizant of this business going on in your brain. Be cognizant of the fact that you probably may be talking yourself out of some limbic resonantial activities that would make you more empathetic. Try using empathy as you think about how you might make a change in your school and the work that you do. This is a photo that I took on Thursday during one of our sessions. And this is some of your colleagues here doing an empathetic interview with some students that arrived here. Look at her face. She's really pouring herself out. And she's being heard. She's being listened to. She feels like the educators at the table are her peer. That they're co-constructing something good together because they're taking the time to do it. And it doesn't take very much time at all. I'm going to plead that you adopt the beginner's mindset, that you work from the heart more and kind of forget where you are. We do a very good job in graduate education programs of providing a lot of knowledge for our candidates, making sure that they understand all the latest theories, that they understand how to write well, and then we kick them out into the educational sphere and we ask them to lead. But then we expect them to pretty much do that all by themselves. And we expect them to do it as if they know everything about where they're at. When actually, if you reframe and you take on a beginner's mindset, say, I'm not even sure where I am, then you can look at things anew, particularly from the view of those that are most important to design for, oftentimes the kids. This great quip by David Foster Wallace that two young fish pass an older fish, and as they pass the older fish, he says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And we keep going on a little bit, and for a while, he says, "What the heck is water?" We forget we're in schools. We forget we're around kids. We forget we're in communities. We show up, we go through the motions, and by stepping out of that, then you can start to reframe. So my plea is to get up and get out. Get up, get out of the office, get into the halls, implore your leadership to get out of their leadership suite, to do the walkthroughs, to be with the kids. Ask your principal or your leadership, or if you are one, to shadow a kid all day and see what it's like to go through their whole day. There's some work that was done here this week thinking about how to think more like an entrepreneur, an entrepreneurship. So I couldn't resist pulling something from Steve Blank in his Startup Owner's Manual. He talks about the most important thing you can do as a startup owner is to get out and talk to customers. Because it says no business plan ever survives first contact with a customer. So almost the analog here is in, no curriculum or no policy ever survives first contact with a kid. And so it's only after you're out for a long time that you know whether or not you have a valid vision or you just have a hallucination. So you might imagine how some of the things going on in your own organizations might be predicated on theories that are not really vetted well with the community that you're in. So I'm suggesting that you radically collaborate. Get out there. Work shoulder to shoulder with students to create new meaning for their lives and the way in which you run your school. This is another photo taken on Wednesday during our workshop as they're sketch prototyping ideas around how to improve experiences around the mobile devices in the schools. And this student is doing all the work at a very high level with educators at her shoulder as peers. It takes so little to enchant. The bar is very low to really surprise and delight students. And the thing of it is because of the way our brain works, and as Lewis and Armani and Lyman talk about, our society underplays the importance of emotions, and having allied itself with the neocortical brain, our culture promotes analysis over intuition and logic about feeling. So my plea to you is to embrace your limbic resonance. Look in the face of the students, look in the face of the parents, and maybe ask them how their heart is, how it is going for them, and what it is you could do to serve them better. And getting out of your own head, because if you don't understand the lives and passions of people that you're designing for, then you end up designing experiences about you and your assumptions about what's right. And so my plea is to have you become a searcher. That's my plea. Because if you did that, then I think we can design the school that we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don. I think in particular the plea to listen to students in our schools is a really important one for us all to take back. I want to thank all of you for coming out to the conference, giving us your time. I hope that you got as much out of it as I know we put into organizing it, and you go back to your schools inspired with new ideas and you can take that and really make a difference in the lives of students. We will be sending around feedback forms by email, and we do ask that you fill those out. We listen very carefully to your ideas about what we can change and improve. We also want to thank, of course, all of our sponsors and all the people that spoke at the conference as well. If you were a workshop presenter, we sent you an email. There's a small gift that we're giving you in recognition of the time that you gave up before and during the conference to share your ideas. So please pick that up at the desk at the front. So once again, a big round of applause to all the speakers, sponsors, and